Hey everybody, it's Kneecap here, and in this video we have the first Mythic Plus testing that I did here on the beta. We're going to be watching through some footage that I recorded of it. We'll also be going over some talents on the client itself. This one in particular that I have pulled up is a Grim Batol, one of the dungeons in Season 1 of The War Within, and the build we're running for this is just straight AoE build with Herald hero talents. So by straight AoE build, I just mean basically the same AoE build that you would have on Dragonflight, more or less. There's a couple changes to it, just here and there, but it's more or less that same thing. So if you play Dragonflight at all, you can kind of understand the type of build that I have. Just very straightforward. I do think a variation of this will end up being the most damage in Mythic Plus. We'll go ahead and start the video. I do think a variation of this will end up being the most damage in Mythic Plus, just with the straight AoE talents plus Herald. However, there are some interesting things. So, probably the most important thing to start off talking about is right now on the beta, the gear gets scaled when you go into content to test it. And the eye level of gear that we have inside these Mythic Plus dungeons is like lower than LFR gear, I'm pretty sure. And so you can see, I think we're in a +3 here. Doing +5s and 6s is really hard. And like the very top end teams are doing higher keys than that, but it's very, very hard. Like everything one-shots you when you get too high. And you'll even see in here that I'm sure we die in here and stuff like that too. I can't remember if we did this run or not. I did like 3 or 4 Grim Batols tonight alone. It's one of my favorite dungeons from Kata, and I really enjoy it here as well. So yeah. So it's really hard to pull big packs. So ultimately, this full AoE spec that I'm using, even though on this particular damage meter, if you watch the damage meter, you're going to see that I lead the damage on this dungeon by a lot throughout the whole thing for the most part. And I think it probably could have been more, but you know, Warlocks are really good too. And of course, different skill levels and stuff like that. But I'm not getting the most out of my build because we're not pulling these giant pulls. See, this is only a 3-pack here, right? So I actually probably could get more out of this by running some different talents, maybe even running Templar at the fact when you're only pulling 3 or 4 mobs at a time, right? And so that's one thing that really stood out to me. And so that's what I did, right? I messed around with some different builds, tried some different things. Ultimately, it ended up being about similar DPS. But it's really hard to tell dungeon to dungeon because even though, like I said, I did multiple of this one dungeon, we did the pulls differently. The group skill was different in each one. And so it's really hard to tell for sure. You know, you can just look at the overall DPS and stuff like that. But again, it's just hard to judge, you know, especially like a thing like a skill, right? What if in one group your Warlock isn't very good, and in the other group your Warlock's really, really good and does a ton of damage, right? That completely changes how that dungeon is run and how much damage you do and how much, you know, when your cooldowns are up and everything, right? And so that's why it's hard to judge. So what we can talk more about is the feel, right? I think ultimately when you're AoEing, at least to me, right? When I'm AoEing, I'm just trying to do the most AoE damage possible. And so for feel, I think the Herald plus all AoE talents just feels good as well. I like, you know, we've talked about it before, the Sun's Avatar, those are the lines coming through my character right now. Those are all burning everything that they're going through. I just think this feels really good. I'm hopping around, you know, I'm making sure my lines are through as many things as I can. You know, I have Dawn Light on things, which is ticking. They have Experg on them, which is ticking. They're in Consecration, which is ticking. I think this entire build just feels good to AoE with. However, and we'll look at some talents for a more single target center build, but you know, I had fun playing that too. That can be fun as well. Tons of errors in here when you're trying to do this, so you'll keep seeing these Lua things pop up on the screen here. But yeah, I thought it felt really good. The only downside is, and it just kind of perpetuates something that we already had in Dragonflight, is that Herald of the Sun is not intuitively good for single target. It's not that it's bad for single target, but it's just not intuitively good. Why? Because like one of the talents, what it does on your hero talent is it puts Dawnlight on 4 things, right? But when, and you know, they can go on your allies as well, but you know, generally speaking, as Rep Paladin, obviously it's like tuned to where you're not doing too much healing. They never want Rep Paladins to do too much healing, just like with Ashen Hollow or something, right? In the past, they never want us to do too much healing, so it's always kind of nerfed down. And so you're not really getting a lot of value out of some of the Herald of the Sun hero talents when you are doing single target damage, let's say to a boss or something, right? And so that's when it feels bad, which is kind of like now where, you know, you get kind of weaker when you choose, when on bosses, you kind of hit like a noodle sometimes in Dragonflight, and that can be the same thing here. Now, we're going to talk about a Templar single target setup as well. We're also going to talk about Judge, Jury, and Executioner. I'll do a whole video on that maybe. I know it's a talent that a lot of people have liked. I do think it was pretty good. And we'll talk about that as well. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to talk about with Herald of the Sun and AoE. Again, it was just really hard to tell. There we saw kind of a big pull, but things were already hurt or whatever. You can see I did a ton of damage on that pull. And I would have done more, obviously, if I didn't have to run away and kite it out at the end. So it's one of those things where you can do so much damage with this. Like it's considerably more, right? It's probably like 30% more damage with Herald of the Sun AoE than what you do on like a cleave build, right? On AoE pulls. Now, the difference would be how much do you make up on bosses on the cleave / more single target build. And if it's a lot, then it could end up like equaling out, right? Is it 30% more damage on single target and 30% less on AoE? Now there's more AoE pulls, so you'll still, in that exact case, you still would do more damage overall, since you're doing more AoE pulls than single target pulls. But you can just see here, I'm just the pulls that stay alive long enough to get through your whole rotation. You're just doing quite a bit of damage as a Herald of the Sun. You get tons of procs as well, and just all these beams burning. It's just fun to watch as well, in my opinion. But yeah, Ret is set up fine for Mythic Plus right now. I can't stress that enough. The damage, it's all going to be about tuning. The Herald of the Sun is really, really fun. AoEing is very, very fun as Ret right now, and there's also multiple ways to do it. So, well, let's go ahead and look real quick and talk about Judge, Jury, Executioner, and look at these talents. So this is, let me switch back to the exact build I had for that dungeon. So for the last Groom I did this evening, I ran Templar plus this build. Now this build is very single target focused. As you can see, I don't even have any of these talents on the right, which are considered AoE talents most of the time, and I have all of them on the left. We took Judge, Jury, Executioner, and we also tried out Vanguard of Justice. Judge, Jury, Executioner, I think, is actually a pretty good talent. People have said it is. People have asked me to try it. One of my old guildmates, who I trust very much, their opinion, has said they liked it. So I gave it a shot, and I will say this is a good talent. Basically, now I was thinking, I think it's 40% on your Divine Storm that your final verdict's going to cleave, basically. Now I think it's per enemy hit 40%, because it was basically proccing. I think there was literally only one time, maybe twice in the dungeon, where I pressed Divine Storm and it didn't proc, which obviously that shouldn't happen if it's only 40% overall, but it might be 40% per mob hit, right? So it's almost a coin flip, and you know, 5 coin flips, it's not quite a coin flip, but almost, right? And 5 coin flips, you're probably going to get 1 heads, right? And so it procs almost every time, and therefore you go Divine Storm, Final Verdict, Divine Storm, Final Verdict, and you just kind of keep doing like that. Now this is going to get, when you do a big enough pull, right, you're never really going to want to worry about the Final Verdict, because the Final Verdict cleave is not going to be as much as a Divine Storm, a natty Divine Storm hitting like 10 targets, right? That's just, it's just not, it's going to, there's going to be a target number, right? And it's probably a fairly low target. I said 10, but it might be 5, it might be 6. I don't know the exact target number will be, but there's going to be a target number where the Divine Storm, natty Divine Storm, is just better than a Final Verdict cleave. But for lower targets, right, if you're pulling 1 pack at a time for in a dungeon, whether it's because it's a high key, whether it's because of the way the dungeon is set up, then it's actually very good. And what's also good about this is it gives an actual cleave component. And the true test of this, in my opinion, of Judge, Jury, and Executioner is going to be if it's usable on 2-target cleave. That's been a traditional problem for Ret Paladins, because a lot of times, what do? We run full single target, and you know, if the other mob gets consecrated or whatever, it gets consecrated. But for 2-target cleave, will this be a upgrade over running execution sentence and just full single target build and never pressing Divine Storm? So will it be a damage gain on 2-target cleave to Divine Storm, Final Verdict cleave, Divine Storm, Final Verdict cleave? It very well could be. Like I said, it's set up to be a pretty solid talent. So we'll see with that. But that would make a very big quality of life change to Retribution. Let's talk about this other talent. This other talent is clearly meant to kind of go with this one, and it's Vanguards of Justice. It's 2 points here. And it's enemies hit by Final Verdict have 50% increased damage from your next Divine Storm. So it's meant to be, right, you Divine Storm, proc your Final Verdict cleave, and then Divine Storm hits everything cleaved for more damage than it would otherwise. Now, this talent does not do enough damage, and it's 2 points. This is a big critique of this talent. This will be, I need to write this down on talents that like need to be worked on or whatever. This talent is not strong enough as is, because if the Final Verdict was cleaving everything, then of course it would be. Because it's not. It's really not enough damage. It didn't modify my Divine Storm damage enough to even justify taking it when I went over the log and stuff like that. It wasn't even worth having taken this talent. The 2 points would have been better served pretty much anywhere else on the talent tree other than where they were. So this was not a great option, if I'm being completely honest. You know, I could have went with Fervor and Crusading Strikes. I could have went High Lord's Wrath and Penitence. You know, there was a bunch of different things I could have did and kept like the same basic build, but this talent needs worked on. It's also the 2 points of it. If it's going to be 2 points, it's going to need to be like 50%, 100%. Even that doesn't make a lot of sense, because like I said, 50% isn't really enough. So it kind of just needs to be 1 point, and that point just needs to be powerful, like 75%, 100%, something like that, right? Because it only really makes sense to take this Final Verdict from your Divine Storm. It only really makes sense to take this if you have Judge, Jury, and Executioner, the way it's set up now. Like, these two talents go together, but so it's 3 talent points, and only one of them is actually even worth taking. So that's not good. So I would like to see this go down to 1 point and have it be at a decent number. I don't know what that number's at. I know it's not 50% because it seemed pretty worthless at 50%. I don't know if that's 75%. I don't know if it's 100%. I don't know if it's 150%. Right? Numbers are numbers, and without simulations, there's no way I'm ever going to figure it out. I could go into a million dungeons and try to figure it out, and it would just be impossible for me to do on my own. So now maybe if every Ret Paladin joined together and did it together, we could do it without simulations. But by myself, it's not going to be possible. So yeah, these talents kind of go together, but this one's kind of sucks, and this one's kind of good. So the good news is that this one is good, and so that's a possible, like I said, a cleave component there for us. And this one just needs to be changed. I mean, you could, at this point, like, it's so bad that you could either just get rid of it or you can make it stronger. But having 2 points here is just, it's really just kind of unthinkable in a lot of ways. So, you know, you could run something like this instead. But yeah, this build was very, very fun though. So this build focused mostly on single target. So my biggest damage was going to be Templar's Verdict, right? Because I'm pressing Divine Storm once just so I can press Final Verdict again. I'm also running Templar with this, so I'm also Hammer of Lighting. This ended up not being much of a DPS loss at all from the Herald of the Sun, but that's just because, again, we were pulling like 4 mobs at a time, meaning that Hammer of Light is just smashing everything, right? And so getting like almost full value with your single target stuff, obviously, and the single target stuff is going to be stronger, you know, naturally than the AoE stuff. And so until you hit the target threshold, you know, it's actually quite good. So this is quite fun to play as well. I didn't gain as much damage on the bosses as I would have thought. And that's honestly because you're not running Execution Sentence with this. without execution sentence, you just lose too much of your single target damage, in my opinion. It's just, even though it's not like your main single target damage, it is a big chunk of it, and you lose a lot when you do not run execution sentence in a single target build. So I still was missing out on a lot of damage on bosses, even with this build, but it is very good prio damage, and it was very good for pulling those 4-packs and stuff like that. Now, here's the thing. In reality, when this goes live, the type of keys that I'm going to be doing, I'm not going to be pushing keys. 90% of you aren't going to be pushing keys. You know, some people are, and maybe they're going to try a build like this. But for me, I'm just going to be running full AoE. I'm going to be running Herald of the Sun, and I'm going to be running all the AoE. I'm going to be running Searing Light, you know, Burning Crusade. I'm going to be running all the AoE talents. And, you know, I'm just doing as much damage as I can, making the key go as fast as I possibly can, so we can time it, even when we have deaths and everything like that, right? And so that's going to be the reality. But it is nice to check out these other builds, see how they work, see how viable they are, and how fun they are. And once again, like, one thing I've pointed out so far is pretty much every single build that I've done is fun in some way. Like, people said Judge Jury Executioner is fun, and it is. It's fun. It's kind of interesting to go Divine Storm, Final Verdict, Divine Storm, Final Verdict, Divine Storm, Final Verdict, and it, like, not be like this terrible DPS loss that it normally would be. So I definitely enjoyed that a lot, and, you know, I just naturally enjoyed the Herald and the AoEing. So altogether, I think Ret's in a pretty cool place for dungeons. It's all going to depend on tuning. If we're tuned good, then we're going to be really good in dungeons, just like in Dragonflight right now. Like, Ret's really good in Dragonflight right now, and we will be in the War Within if we're tuned properly. And tuning is tuning. You know, that's just up to Blizzard. Do they want to crank the knob up? Do they want to crank the knob down? That's up to them. But it's set up to be fun, and it's set up to be, you know, fast-paced. It's set up to be interesting in some ways. And, yeah, I really am enjoying it so far. So that was... I'll try to get more specific videos in. I'm doing, like, these big old, like, I tested this out, I tested that out. I'll try to get more specific as we go. But I really need to put a foundation in first, in my opinion, of like, okay, this is my first step into Mythic Plus. This is kind of the baseline where we're at. And now let's get into specific videos about specific talents, their damage, talents that need changed, all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, we'll call it here on this one, and we'll get more specific in the future. As always, I do ask you to please subscribe to the channel, because it helps me out a lot. If you're already a subscriber, I did recently create a Patreon. You can check that out if you'd like to. And other than that, everybody, have a good one.